Under current law, all electricity in the state of Illinois will be required to come from zero emission sources and nuclear power by 2045. We have literally tied our hands and turned our backs on abundant Illinois coal, all in the name of the failed Green New Deal.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel, and I'm joined once again with Jeff Berkowitz in Chicago with Public Affairs TV. And Jeff, we are in May of 2025, and May means that the end of the legislative session is drawing near. The legislature has to put out a budget by the end of this month. Speculation is that it'll be about $62 billion. We'll have to see what happens between now and then. But that said, there are other issues going on, and one of the interesting things was that soundbite from CD Davidsmeyer, who's a state representative from Jacksonville, Illinois, talking about how electric demand is soaring because of a variety of factors, but largely because of AI and all these data centers. And data centers have been something that Governor Pritzker has pushed, to his credit, I would say. But at the same time, existing law says we got to get rid of our fossil fuel plants, coal and natural gas, and that's providing the majority of the electricity in Illinois. So this is one of those issues where I don't know to the extent to which people have focused on it, but you and I are going to give it some highlight because it's really critical if people are going to find out without being told that all of a sudden the reliability of their electricity is questionable, while at the same time prices go shooting up.
Well, this is the problem with people like the Democratic Party nationally and here in Illinois lives in the fantasy in which we really don't need so much to have energy because we don't need to have fossil fuel energy. We just need to have clean energy, lots of wind, lots of solar. If there's no wind around, if the sun isn't shining, don't worry. We'll figure out how to store it later, even though we haven't yet. It's a joke. They've set these deadlines to cut out coal. First it was 2040, then 2035. Now I guess it's probably going to be 2030. And that's just when 2025 is now when energy demands throughout the country are taking off, including Illinois, because as you just pointed out, the demands of AI. Terry, we don't have adult leadership in our governor, in our senators. The Democratic Party has no longer, they've stopped being adults in Illinois and across the country. When it's Bernie Sanders and AOC running the Democratic Party, that's collectively, 120 years of immaturity. So this is the opportunity. We'll get to this in the show for the Illinois Party. The failures in Illinois of Governor Pritzker, and now his way to muscle in his favorite for Senate, Democratic nominee for Senate. He is inviting chaos and inviting derision.
Well, we'll get a little bit more to that, the races, but first, let's talk on this electric generation. And the point is, as we can see, and they would point out, here's a graph showing the growth of electricity. And what people maybe don't know, because it hasn't been reported as much as it should, is that we are going into the AI era, artificial intelligence, and AI uses a tremendous amount of electricity. These data centers are loaded with computers, and we can just see where we are there on 2025, and we are going to have a spike in demand. And in essence, what is happening is at the same time, Illinois passed a previous law that says we got to get rid of fossil fuels. So we're degrading our availability in Illinois, our availability of electricity, at a time when the demand curve is shooting upwards. And obviously, not only does that mean that the grid may not have the power that it needs to provide and go around, so you could have brownouts, you could have blackouts, but as demand gets to be limited while our demand goes up while the supply goes down, in economics, that means we're going to have high prices in electricity. And I want to play one more bite from that press conference from Representative C.D. Davidsmeyer. He was talking about in southern Illinois, in other words, south of I-80, we are in what they call the MISO, M-I-S-O, area of the grid. And I just looked, I have the MISO app on my phone, which tells you where the electricity is coming at any point in time. Right now, natural gas and coal combined at this very moment that we tape this on May 15th makes up 50% of the amount of electricity being generated for Illinois consumers. And then we got about another 11% from nuclear. I mean, if you take away coal and natural gas, you're going to be losing 50% of the availability. And I will remind you of the obvious that at nighttime, there is no solar power. So something's going to have to give here. But let's listen to just what C.D. Davidsmeyer had to say on this topic.
The ICC published a chart showing that by 2045, when Illinois coal and natural gas plants are scheduled to be gone, the state's section of MISO could have the capacity to produce just 30% of the electricity it needs. 30%. Rising solar output could fill some of this gap, but definitely not all, the ICC said. According to the ICC, this MISO shortfall is the state's most pressing energy issue. Clearly, Illinois' energy policy and infrastructure are failing to meet the huge demand for reliability and reasonable price.
So only 30% would be available. What do you think, Jeff?
Well, Terry, that must be a max, because I think Illinois is planning to phase out coal by 2035. He's given these numbers for 2045. I think we got zero coming from coal in Illinois. So is that much all natural gas? And we've kind of cut out nuclear stupidly. We don't even go toward most states in the U.S. are going toward small nuclear
reactors. That might be a trend. But, you know, sometimes we've painted ourselves in Illinois in a corner by passing these laws that say you got to get rid of fossil fuel when we don't have a replacement for them. The same people that don't want coal and natural gas, I think, are in large part for environmental reasons opposed to nuclear. Well, what are you going to do to turn the lights on? Wind and solar are not baseload powers. That's a term that a baseload electric source is something that produces electricity 24 hours a day to meet demand. As I just said, obviously you're not going to have any solar power at night, and the wind isn't always blowing. These two sources, wind and solar, cannot fill the gap. It cannot happen. They cannot fill the gap that would be lost if you eliminate fossil fuels. So, as I say, this is a result of when people vote for things that they don't understand, that haven't been properly explained to them, but this is what they have done in Illinois. And what's going to happen as we get closer and we're closing these plants, how many people, especially the elderly, those living on fixed incomes, can afford to have their electricity on anymore, cook with electric stoves? I mean, they only have fixed incomes. They can't make up that difference of having their electric bill go from $80 or $100 or $120 to $400, $500, or $600 a month.
And I know people who are expert in this area, and they know other experts, and they are talking about Illinois actually could be a low-cost energy state because it has all these nuclear plants. Many people assume they've exhausted their 30, 40-year expected life, but my understanding is they can be retrofitted to last longer. And the nuclear has high fixed costs, and those have been mostly spent. The variable costs are low, the incremental costs of production. So if you can extend the lives of these nuclear reactors we have in conjunction with investing in small reactors, Illinois can be a low-cost energy state, but they're not.
Well, Illinois has been historically a low-cost energy state, and at a different point in this press conference, Davidsmeyer, who is also joined by Dave Severin and Brad Holbrook, Davis Meyer noted that one of the things that was easier to draw industry to Illinois, manufacturing kind of companies where electricity is a big part of their cost structure, was that we had lower energy costs. So not only is it going to hit consumers of electricity in the households, it's going to make it maybe drive industry out of Illinois, or certainly make it a lot harder to ever attract anyone that uses a lot of electricity. It just goes to show that we don't have proper planning when we're passing some of these laws and looking at down the road at what are the consequences. And right now we got a looming train wreck.
But that ties in with nationally and Illinois, which we'll get to in a few minutes. But nationally, as we tape the show, Trump will be soon on his way back from a trip to the Middle East, which was really, really a major game changer for the United States. It was Trump going to Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, going to United Arab Emirates, Abu Dhabi, okay?
Qatar,
and then going to Qatar, and then Doha. And those three entities are becoming tremendously important. That is, in a sense, the new Middle East. And Trump has befriended these folks. He was the first. This is the first U.S. visit to these countries, I believe. Certainly a first U.S. state dinner that they threw for Trump. And so, and much more was happening. Trump wants help with the deal. Ironically, he wants a deal with Iran, not like the one we had from the Obama administration, which was fraught with
and the Biden administration.
It didn't work. And the Biden administration. Trump wants a deal that makes clear that Iran will never have a nuclear reactor, and he wants it clear. If he does, he'll never have a nuclear bomb. Excuse me. Let me just correct myself real quick.
Go ahead.
They will never have nuclear bombs, nuclear missiles. They want nuclear energy. I'm not sure they'll ever have that, commercial energy, but surely they won't.
Well, they could have that.
Have a bomb.
They could have nuclear energy. They can't. I can't think of the term. You have to spend the development of enriched uranium. You can't have the enriched uranium, which you would need for a bomb. They could have nuclear.
That's the problem. But anyway, so
but they would also have to. Let me just set this up here for a minute. First of all, Trump in the first term, we might remember, isolated Iran and cut off their oil supply, so they were impoverished as a country and weren't able to export some of this terrorism and pay Hamas and others. Now, Trump is on this trip, and this is kind of critical, is trying to say, look, we want a new deal with Iran. And what Trump is doing in the larger sense here, going around to these countries, is not just raising $1.4 trillion in new investment for the United States, money from these other countries that will be going into America. Also, part of that is them buying more Boeing jets. But he's changing the political equation, as he calls it, going from commerce, not chaos. And that's what he's working on here. And apparently the way he has been received is highly successful.
Yeah, it's not just a matter of selling a few planes. It's selling 200 Boeing planes to these countries. And it's selling, the Department of Defense made a deal to sell Qatar drones, long-range drones. So we are becoming intimately involved with these countries in their business, their growth of their business, and therefore they become dependent on this cooperation with the U.S. And they will help, that's Trump's view, and some of our strategic objectives militarily and in foreign policy. So the Middle East is becoming a friend. These countries are looking for friends. The U.S. is becoming a friend. The finesse that he'll need to do is to bring Israel back into the equation. Notice they were conspicuously absent from this trip, but obviously they are a major ally of the United States. And his hope and dream is to start becoming the peacemaker in the Middle East. Peace for Israel, that's peace through strength, as it's saying with the peace for the United States. So this was a remarkably game-changing trip for Donald Trump. And meanwhile, take a look at where the Democratic Party is. They're out in Newark trying to see if they can screw up things with ICE and see if they can do body slams. It's almost comical. It almost seems like the Democratic Party has now become an SNL skit on
You know, Jeff,
Saturday night.
I had posted on Facebook earlier in the week that I, like you, we've followed politics long before we were even adults. And as I noted, can't remember a time in my lifetime over the last 65 years that there has been such a lopsided imbalance between the powers of the Democrat and Republican parties. And to have Trump over there, not just to make it too much about this trip, but all that he's accomplished without going through the whole litany of it. And yet, as you note, at the same time, the Democrats have no leader, they have no agenda. The only thing that they're talking about in one variation of another falls under the umbrella of "we hate Trump." That's the gist of what they are saying. And whatever Trump is for, they're against, even if it makes sense, such as getting some of these MS-13 characters out of our country. They're still going down and talking about MS-13 people and arguing for men playing on women's sports. I want to play this bite, though, from the president, because this is the kind of thing, almost like Reagan's Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, where President Trump is getting to one of the key elements of his speech that he gave to the Saudi U.S. Investment Forum, talking about his views of Iran. Let's take a listen.
I want to make a deal with Iran. If I can make a deal with Iran, I'll be very happy if we're going to make your region and the world a safer place. But if Iran's leadership rejects this olive branch and continues to attack their neighbors, then we will have no choice but to inflict massive maximum pressure, drive Iranian oil exports to zero, like I did before. If you know that, they were a virtually bankrupt country because of what I did. They had no money for terror. They had no money for Hamas or Hezbollah, and take all action required to stop the regime from ever having a nuclear weapon. Iran will never have a nuclear weapon.
And so that was President Trump at the forum in Saudi Arabia. And Jeff, what's interesting, if we look back going back to the 1960s, the relationship of the United States to these Arab nations has largely been one of you sell us oil and we'll sell you military weapons. This is President Trump laying down a new marker, and raising that money is not just amazing that he was raised over $1 trillion on this trip, but it signals that we are integrating our economies with these nations. And one of the things that Trump mentioned in his speech, which was fascinating, that I had never heard before, Saudi Arabia has now pivoted its economy so that it is making now more money from other sources of their economic activity, more money than what they make on oil sales, which is really good because eventually oil is going to run out for Saudi Arabia. So it's amazing, but it also underscores the need to strengthen these ties with these growing economies in the Middle East.
Well, this ties in what's happening nationally and internationally with Trump, with what could happen in Illinois. Because at the same time as Trump is consolidating and perhaps extending the breadth of his influence on the National Republican Party, if not control, at the same time, opportunities could be arising for Illinois to revitalize the Illinois GOP. Because there's speculation and people are talking about the GOP having credible candidates statewide for the U.S. Senate, which that election will be coming up in 2026, and the governor's reelection in 2026, they could have a credible candidate for governor. And the names that are being tossed around, Darin LaHood, congressman, downstate, may be persuaded to give up a safe seat to run for the U.S. Senate become the nominee
Let
of
me
the
bring, if I
Republican
might
Party.
here, Jeff, there's a picture of Darin LaHood, and Darin LaHood is a former federal prosecutor, former state senator, and now he is a U.S. congressman and has been for, I think he may be in his fourth term, so about 8 years, maybe 10 years or so, since he was first elected.
People are speculating that
And
Todd
by the way, you're
Ricketts
saying he would be running for what? Which office?
for the U.S. Senate.
Senate, okay.
That's a logical move from U.S. Congress, U.S. House to the U.S. Senate.
Have you
He's
heard
certainly
anything
familiar
behind
with
the
those issues.
scenes that Mr. LaHood would be interested in running for the Senate?
I have, and people have talked about that before, that he could be perhaps pressured or talked into it, because it is a very safe seat. But think about it. If he runs, I think he's got a good chance. He's got a good chance, we can talk about that, of beating whoever is the Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate. And we have 3 or 4 that we could speculate on there. But even if he doesn't, Trump after 2026 has 2 more years on his presidency. So there should be cabinet positions, lots of national important
Yeah,
opportunities.
you got a
if
fallback
he runs and
position if you
loses.
lose, which is critical
Right.
because people don't want to give up their source of income and their ability to work within government if that's been their career. But you're right.
And
If
on
President Trump, he could, if we had a Senate candidate, what often happens is that you could then get a spot in the administration.
Darin LaHood's been coming upstate a lot. He's no downstater. He speaks like an upstater. I've seen him speak to groups 200, 300. He's very fluent in these national issues. He's good with the crowd. This is no amateur.
He's good on national security issues too. And I will add, I just ran
Right.
into his father the other night and said hello. His father was Congressman Ray LaHood, who was around Congress for a number of years, highly trusted. Jeff, you and I know that if we look at the last gubernatorial race here in Illinois, Darin Bailey ran, but Darin Bailey was not, a lot of people within the Republican Party were not enamored of Darin Bailey. They thought either he was too country or too conservatives. I would say that if Darin LaHood ran, I think LaHood would be well accepted by pretty much all members of the Republican Party because he is, as you just noted, he would play well, I think, upstate, but he's also got some good conservative credentials when it comes to spending, law enforcement, and national security.
So he'll play well downstate. If you play well upstate and you play well downstate, and you also may play his dad's relationship being a part of the Obama administration, Ray
Yeah, his
LaHood
dad, I should
may
have
be
said.
able to,
His dad was
he may be able to
transportation
reach out.
secretary under Obama, so.
So he has a connection to Democrats and to independents and to moderates across the state of Illinois, while being, I think, fairly solid with the conservative base of the Republican Party. So that's the Senate race. We'll come back to that again if we have a little more time.
Let me
But on
throw
the
in one
governor's
last
side-
thing before we move on.
Yeah.
The Republicans in Congress right now are rewriting the tax cuts of 2017. They're going to extend them. They're going to make them permanent, which means in the bill they won't have an expiration date. So if we have some Democratic congressmen from Illinois who are thinking about running for the Senate, and they vote against President Trump's cutting taxes, which is not going to be a clean bill. It's also going to have these elements where Trump just announced this week that he was going to be reducing pharmaceuticals. If you have a congressman, a Democratic congressman, vote against lowering pharmaceutical costs, and in essence voting to raise your taxes because they vote against a tax cut, that's going to be hard to defend when you come back then to run for the Senate and say, put me in power.
Yeah, and I'll just say in 30 seconds, 3 of the 4 Democrats who have already come in the race, because Pritzker already endorsed his lieutenant governor, Juliana Stratton, who's 59. And what has she done with her 59 years? She was 6 years a lieutenant governor. I don't think anybody can think of anything she's done of significance in those 6 years. Fine. I'd like to interview her and ask her and be fair and give her a chance, but she's not been the most conspicuous Democrat holding the position of lieutenant governor, and Robin Kelly, and Robin Kelly's already said she's entering
Congresswoman
the
Robin
race.
Kelly.
Congressman Robin Kelly, been a guest on Public Affairs, a fine person, but a traditional Democrat. She's probably the most accomplished, having been in Congress now for 12 years, of these four nominees. And then and we can note, Juliana Stratton is black. Congresswoman Kelly is black. Look, Congresswoman, and I should have said Congresswoman
Lauren
Kelly.
Underwood.
Congresswoman Underwood is black. So you have three blacks
Three
running
black
against
women.
each other.
I
see how
mean,
well that
which is certainly going to divide the black vote. So
there's already, well, I want to go on to say, so they got some issues. Pritzker's trying to clear the field a little bit. Then there's a $20 million guy, 20 million in his war chest already, Raja Krishnamurthy. But let's go over to the Republicans, because they're still really the news now. Because who do you have on the Republican side to run for governor? Well, you could have Todd Ricketts,
let me bring up here an image. Hang on, of Todd Ricketts. What do you know about Mr. Ricketts?
Well, part of the famous Ricketts family. Tom, his brother,
downstate, they're not the famous Ricketts family. So tell us.
Well, we should now tell you the Ricketts family owns the Chicago Cubs. Todd is part of the board of the board for the Chicago Cubs and the board of directors, and the chairman of that board is his brother Tom Ricketts. Todd has been involved in the National Republican Party, the RNC.
I believe his
Finance
brother
Committee.
isn't his brother a senator from Nebraska?
Brother Peter is another brother, and he's the senator. He was the governor from Nebraska. So they know politics, they know money, they know people with money. And then you have a few more gubernatorial candidates that you might choose from.
And I'm sorry, are we talking Senate or gubernatorial, did you say?
Well, we just don't governor's side, but we've got Richard Porter, who said he's thinking of running.
Well, hang on one second. Did you say Ricketts is going for governor or Senate?
Most likely, if he runs, he'll run for governor. And he would be the governor candidate in some people's minds, and the Senate candidate would be LaHood.
Okay.
But some people
let me bring up Richard Porter real quick.
Right. He's also a national person. He was involved in the RNC, the Republican National Committeeman, for like a dozen years. So very fluent with these national issues. But he's thinking of running for governor, and he may. And also there's Ted Dabrowski, not as well known as the others, but Ted is known for knowing the issues. He's developed a strong delineation.
Ted from
of
our
state
friend
issues.
at WirePoints, and we frequently are using their research data when we make these slides.
Well, their research data, which the other Republicans are also relying on if they run for governor, show that education in Illinois, not just Chicago, has been a disaster. And Pritzker's not done a thing in his 6 years. 1 out of every 3, according to WirePoints, 1 out of every 3.
But Jeff, when you got to spend maybe
$100
$100 million or near, maybe you don't have to spend that much, but you got to spend a heck of a lot for the Senate, or even for the governorship would be a lot. Could Ted Dabrowski come up with that kind of money? These other guys are pretty well connected.
Well, let me get to that. Finishing out Dabrowski. It's the issues. And on education, he's documented. Only 1 out of every 3 students throughout the state of Illinois, our 2 million students, read at grade level. So failure, and Pritzker's done nothing. He and Porter and Ricketts would argue, whoever the governor candidate is. And they would also talk about crime, awful, across the state, but especially in Chicago. Crime has fallen in the last few years nationally, but it's fallen much more slowly, violent crime in Chicago and in Illinois than it is in other states. That's not a plus for J.B. Pritzker. The economy is awful in Illinois.
All right, we're going to have to leave it here, or
growth.
we're going to go over. But thanks always, folks. Give us your comments, what you think, and as always, thanks for watching. And Jeff, you and I will be doing more on the budget as more information comes out. But until next time, we'll have to say goodbye.
And Illinois politics.